In this presentation, we want to briefly cover VOR, VHF Omnidirectional Ranging. We'd like to figure out our airplane's angle between it somewhere up in the sky and one of these VOR transmitters. These are known as Omnis. They used to be fairly ubiquitous. A lot of them have been decommissioned, but a lot of them still exist. You see them. I'm not exactly sure where the closest one here is. You don't really see it over at the airport, I don't think. You do see one if you're down in South Florida driving by the Fort Lauderdale airport. There's one right there by 95 that's pretty obvious. Anyway, these transmit between 108 megahertz and 117.94. That's VHF. That's right above the FM spectrum, right? FM goes 88.1 up to 108 or something like that, right? Or 107 something, so it's right above the FM spectrum. It goes up to 117.95. The carriers are 50 kilohertz apart. There's some overlap with the instrument landing system, so the carriers used are spaced so that they don't interact with each other. It's a pretty cool system. Initially, when these were implemented mechanically, there was a rotating antenna inside here that rotated 30 times a second. Now this is accomplished with this array of antennas, so it's electrically implemented, so the signals are just sent to these different little antennas to implement the seeming transmission, rotation of the signal. So from the point of view of the airplane, it looks like you're getting a 30 hertz amplitude modulated carrier, 30 times a second amplitude, because it's stronger as it's pointing towards you, and as it's pointing away from, these are directional signals, as it's pointing away from you, it's weaker, and so it gets stronger and weaker 30 times a second. So you're receiving this 30 hertz AM, and as we talked last in the previous slide, there's the carrier, and then there's the carrier plus 30 hertz, and there's the carrier minus 30 hertz. Okay, how do we get the reference? How do we get a reference so we can figure out where our 30 hertz, the one we're receiving, is, so we can figure out what the angle we have? Okay, there's another signal, an FM signal, and this is put on a modulation of 9960 hertz. And so the FM signal generates its own sidebands according to Carson's rule. So if we're giving it a 30 hertz modulation, there'll be 30 and 60 and 90 and 100, lots of little extra things. And then all of that's FM modulated around 960 hertz is AM modulated around the same carrier frequency. So when we look down here at the total spectrum, there's a carrier, there's our AM 30 hertz signal, and then here's our 9960 carrier for FM, and then here's the FM signal that carries the 30 hertz signal, and it's got an angle of 0 degrees. I mean, the peak of the sinusoid, the cosine, if you will, lines up at 0 degrees. I think on the next slide we're going to see it's actually a sine wave. So let's illustrate how this works. So the reference signal, which is shown in dark here, I think. Actually, the reference signal is shown in, it was one. I mean, it doesn't really matter which one. Anyway, you can see the reference signal always has 0 degrees pointing, lining up with the north. Here it says down here, the variable signal is the dashed one, the reference signal is the solid one. So the solid one is the reference signal. So if our AM signal that we're receiving, if we're on the heading of the magnetic north at the VOR, our AM signal will align with the demodulated FM signal, so we can compare those two and measure the delay and get the angle, because the angle is going to be proportional to the delay. Whereas if our variable phase signal, our AM signal, if we're out here flying and we're pointing this way or we're at this direction relative to the VOR, we're going to get a signal that has stronger when it's 45 degrees off, and we can measure that timing between that and the reference signal demodulated from the FM part of the signal there. And we can do that for all the different angles. So you can see here the different angles of the aircraft relative to the VOR, and then the angle of the reference signal points due north, and you can measure that using various timing circuits within. And we don't want to get into the details of those, right? And then we can use that to control a display on the dash of the airplane. So we can actually have a alignment that tells us how we're headed relative to what ought to be magnetic north at that VOR.